on a special Brandon show.
An update about Breonna Taylor and what actually does defunding the police really mean.
On a special Brandon show.
It's been over 100 days since Breonna Taylor was shot and killed by police in her home in Louisville, Kentucky, and her family is still waiting for justice. Joining me right now is criminal justice journalist Christina Karenga. Christina, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about this case.
Thank you for having me.
You see these chants everywhere. You see hashtag Breonna Taylor, justice for Breonna Taylor. But every time I see this, the question that always crosses my mind, will there be justice for Breonna Taylor? Will there be justice for Breonna Taylor?
I mean, it's kind of hard to tell at this point. I mean, like you said, we're over 160 days into the days after Breonna was gunned down in her home with her boyfriend up by her side who tried to protect her. He's an armed legal gun owner, and he's the only person to date who's been actually arrested on this case. Thankfully, those charges have been temporarily dismissed pending all the investigations that are happening in Kentucky. You have the FBI, you have the Attorney General, and then you have the local police department all conducting these investigations. And from what we understand from Mayor Fisher is that they can't even tell you the process of what's going on, whether they pass the file on to someone, if they interview certain people. It's a very hush-hush situation because of the laws in Kentucky. So, you know, the days that are passing by, it doesn't make it any better that after her death, we had George Floyd, and within 4 days, we had arrest of all those officers. So it's like, how come it's happening in one city and it's not happening here in Kentucky? And also the Ahmaud Arbery case, which happened before Breonna Taylor's death, even though there were delays in that case in Georgia, his family still has answers to who are the people that are possibly going to be convicted for his death. And meanwhile, Tamika Palmer, Breonna's mother, and the family and the community at large are consistently protesting, consistently asking questions. And it seems like the day that they're supposed to have something happening is approaching. The governor of Kentucky has said that possibly by the Kentucky Derby, which is September 5th, there's supposed to be some type of announcement, whether it's positive or negative. We have no idea. My opinion, if it was going to be a bad decision, say it now. If it's going to be a good decision, say it now. Why put a date of the Kentucky Derby down? It's just leaving people with angst and the community on edge. And the sign of justice, it just seems so far away from where we are right now, even 161 days later.
At least after 3 months, they did fire one of the officers, Brett Hankinson, and put 2 other officers on administrative leave. That's not enough, right?
No, of course not. I mean, if you can determine that one of the 3 officers who fired over 25 bullets into this apartment, and some of those bullets entered to the next door neighbor's apartment where there was a young child sleeping. If you could determine 10 of the over 25 and then fire that one, how come we don't know how much the other 2 fired? I mean, simple math can tell you what the amount is, how many bullets were left in their gun when they returned back to the department to answer to their superiors of what exactly happened. So what they're waiting for, it doesn't even make any sense. I mean, are they having empathy for one of the officers, the Sergeant Mattingly, who was shot in the thigh by Kenneth Walker? Are they giving him empathetic treatment? I don't know. And what do we know about Miles Cosgrove? We really don't know what his whole situation is, but right now they're sitting at a desk and they're still being paid. Meanwhile, Hankerson's the only one that has had some form of accountability in this case, but it's not enough.
It's definitely not enough. Now, they did end the no-knock warrants a few months after this all occurred. How often across the country are no-knock warrants used?
Well, in this particular case, according to the police report and the arrest warrant for this no-knock warrant request, the officers that filed the request with the court had said that the person who we now know was Breonna Taylor's ex-boyfriend, he is a known low-level drug dealer, and they have surveyed him going to her apartment, picking up UPS packages on several occasions, and orchestrating some type of drug trafficking scheme with another individual. So the idea that they put into this warrant was that Drug traffickers are known to have weapons. They're known to destroy evidence if you knock on the door ahead of time. So that gave the judge credence to agree to have this no-knock warrant issued in this particular case. Now, whether it happens across the country, it does. They happen in New York, and they have been several cases where actually a lot of people have been killed because of no-knock warrants. And the regulations on them have not been adhered to, not until recently. And, you know, it's really interesting that a lot of police reform is actually happening right now because of all of these recent deaths. It's very refreshing, but it's like, how many people actually died because of these things that it wasn't a movement before? Why did it take this and now for it all to happen? I think the public, and I think even the elected officials, are just ready, and they had enough. But they do happen even still. No knock warrants are happening, not anymore in Louisville, but there is a caveat to that. You can still do a no-knock warrant because that's still a part of investigation processes that the authorities have. But what they added to that particular rule is they have to wear a body cam when they do them, because these officers in this case were not wearing body cams in this case.
Do you think things would have been different if Breonna Taylor was a man in terms of seeking justice or finding justice?
It's an unfortunate thing that, you know, history is telling us that when a Black woman or a woman of color is killed at the hands of a police officer, justice for some reason just seems to be whether delayed or denied completely. Most people don't realize that you still have the pending investigation of Tatiana Jefferson. There was a case out in Texas for Pamela Turner. Where are their names? And because of the movements like Say Her Name, hashtag say her name, and, you know, Time's Up and other organizations, they try their best to make sure that those names are not forgotten, because they only just happened within the last year. But we know Ahmaud Arbery, we know George Floyd, but I feel like this is not the time to actually pin people against people, victims against victims, to say who's getting the justice and who isn't, whether they're man, woman, or child. Unfortunately for Breonna's case, she lived and died or was killed in Kentucky, a state that it's not exactly a history of finding justice for victims of police brutality. They only had one officer in their history as the Louisville Metro Police Department ever to be indicted for a murder charge, and that was way back in 2004. And that gentleman, he was acquitted of the murder charges. So that's just where the cracks fall in this case when you're comparing woman to man in this particular environment right now.
So when we talk about justice, what is possible? What could they actually do? And what would people be satisfied with in terms of justice for Breonna Taylor?
I think we have seen so much heartache as people of color when it comes to the criminal justice system that to even say that an arrest is a form of justice for us, that's not enough. Firing of the officers, is that justice? That's not enough. A trial to actually happen, well, actually, let's back it up. A grand jury actually indicting the officers, that's still not enough. Because we definitely know in the Eric Garner case, the grand jury in Staten Island declined to indict Officer Daniel Pantaleo. So we know we have these particular steps that we have to overcome before we actually feel satisfied. So even if we get to the trial posture and you have the hearings, we need all the evidence in there. We don't need the defense to have certain particular statements or particular documents being barred from the jury's eyes. We need that in there. And then when they get to the trial posture, we need the jury to be fair. We need it to be as diverse as possible. We've seen cases time and time again that are being overturned because somehow, some way during the voir dire process, the jury ends up being either fully white or not enough people of color. There's no voice in there to speak on, you know, what's going on outside of what's being presented from the prosecutors and the defense during the trial. We need a diverse jury. And then once we get the case to the jury's hands, we need a conviction of guilty. And then we need a judge to actually adhere to the laws that the sentencing deserves for that particular conviction. and to actually sentence that particular person for that crime. Because as we know, as history repeats itself sometimes, sadly, when we had the case of Officer Peter Liang in New York, when he killed Akai Gurley, he got convicted of a manslaughter charge, and the judge ended up sentencing him to essentially community service. I think it was 900 hours of community service. So was there justice there on the books? Yes. But for the family, no, because they don't have Akai. And in this case, if we get to that part where the sentencing judge does not give the fair sentencing to these officers for what they did, nobody's going to feel satisfied. But at the end of the day, when it comes to criminal justice, there is no happy party.
We've seen a lot of protests outside of Kentucky's Attorney General, Daniel Cameron. What role does the Attorney General in Kentucky play?
So Daniel Cameron is the lead investigator on this case. Normally, the Attorney General's office does not step in, especially in Kentucky, to take on a criminal matter. In this particular case, he did. The local Commonwealth attorney, Tom Wine, he actually did not. He was starting the investigation, but he turned it over to them and the FBI, they have bigger resources. They have more, and I guess seasoned attorneys to actually look into this case to really find, is there actual probable cause to bring charges. So Cameron is the higher authority when it comes to finding out, will these officers be charged? So his role is very active in this case. And, he's a Republican. He also is the first African-American to be he won the election to actually be in that particular position. Mm-hmm. So he feels the pressure on him, of course, from the community, but he has been standing firm, saying that he's not going to fall to the pressure of filing charges just to file charges just because he's a Black person. He's going to actually file charges based on the law, and I can appreciate that.
Has it been swift justice for Breonna Taylor? What has been the holdup, in your opinion?
So from what it sounds like, because we don't know every detail of the matter, it sounds like they really are reinvestigating the case from the beginning. Once the Attorney General's office got the case file, and then they had to wait for the ballistics from the FBI, and then they had to wait to re-interview all these different people. Who knows if coronavirus might have been a factor into why they can't investigate or re-interview these people. Yeah. But I will say what's going to come down to this case is that no-knock warrant documentation. It's those words that the officers swore by to actually get that particular warrant executed. Those words in that document is where we're going to see this case really unfold. It's not about the officer's state of mind at the time. It's, did they legally have the right to actually obtain this warrant?
Do you think without everything that has happened over this past summer, do you think the story would have been buried and we would have forgotten about Breonna Taylor?
From what I understand, the local community organization, at least the Black Lives Matter Louisville chapter, has been protesting in the town square and by the courthouse since the beginning. Obviously, the coronavirus has caused the national outrage that would usually happen to slow down. Would we have heard about it in the way that we are hearing about it now? That's an interesting question. I think it's because there wasn't initial video of the incident. We did see that there was footage taken after of Kenneth Walker surrendering to the police. But if you put that video out on social media, would people have paid attention to that? They would have to then read a whole narrative to know what happened. And sadly, in this generation, people aren't reading. They want to see the action right in front of them. The 10-minute video that was posted for George Floyd, as we know, 7 minutes and 46 seconds that contributed to that. The prosecutors initially miscalculated the time. That was something for people to know that something happened here. The Ahmaud Arbery video that was shot by one of the defendants, that was 30 seconds, quick, fast. We see what happens. And, there was nothing else to be said beyond that. When it comes to this case, sadly, because there wasn't enough footage, I don't think we would have gotten the national attention that we have now.
Yeah. What laws do we need to propose or enact to make sure that innocent people aren't killed at the hands of police officers.
I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's all about the police training. Honestly, a lot of police academies are only about 6 months. What are you going to learn in 6 months about, human behavior, about mental illness, about different cultures that you're not raised around? I feel like if there was more training as well as continued training with these officers, we wouldn't be here right now. You think about the police in themselves, they're starting to have a high rate of suicides within the police departments across the country. And that's an issue that they're trying to get into, where they're trying to up the amount of time that the officers do not see a psychiatrist or a therapist. And I think that that's a part of this problem, the empathy factor. And then they become so desensitized covering these particular beats for so many years that they feel like they've seen it and heard it all before, that they paint everybody into a box and they don't give the benefit of the doubt of this new person who may be approaching them with a serious problem. Yeah. You see it, for instance, with George Floyd, he's a tall gentleman. And from what we heard about him, he was very cognizant about his height. He's 6'8", and he knows that as a tall Black man, people are intimidated by his presence of him just standing there, And Ahmaud Arbery, he was just jogging, his daily jog in a neighborhood where he didn't live in, but he lived in the town over. Last I checked, you can jog wherever you want, but apparently if you got the wrong skin color, you're looked at in a different way. And we can't discount the McMichaels in that case, because let's not forget, Gregory McMichael, the father, is a former law enforcement agent. So if that was his mentality as a civilian, can we imagine what it was like when he was actually a cop? So, I do think that to change things, we do need to go back to ground zero. That's why we have these movements for defunding the police, which is not about taking the money away from the police departments. It's essentially just, starting over again.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Because you see online, you hear these narratives, you hear false information, and all people hear when you hear defund is firing police, getting rid of police forces across the country. That's not what it is. Could you explain what defunding the police actually is and what it means?
I take the example from Camden, New Jersey. They were once known as like one of the highest murder rates in the country at one point. And they just wiped out all the officers, meaning that everybody had to reapply for their job. And once they reapplied for their job, they essentially started everything from scratch. And I don't have the statistics on what their shootings are like and what their community relations are like, but they're no longer known as a high crime rate as it was before city, especially when it comes to the community relations. So from what I understand, the defunding means that, we're just allocating the funds to different parts of the police force and the community in order for it to be better utilized. Because police forces across the country, they get funding private, they get funding federally, they get funded from the state, they get so much funding. So even like in New York City, it's the third largest police force in the country behind LA and I believe Chicago. And the amount of money that the NYPD gets for the 40,000 plus officers, plainclothes and, administratively titled officers, for them to have $100 million cut in their budget sounds like astronomical to you and I, but to them that's a drop in the bucket, because then they'll get a grant for $115 million from the feds in the next month, because they're always applying for funding because they do need it for technology advances and to make sure programs are happening. But we just need to understand that it's not about getting rid of everyone. And, that's not it. That's just not it. Policies also need to be changed as well. And I believe that's a part of it as well. It's just it's a re-examining of the police department. That's what it is.
Re-examining, reimagining, being really innovative in how you can use resources to not only help the police force, but help the community. And I think that's something that people don't often understand what that means. And I guess the word isn't, it isn't to me the best way to explain what that process is. And perhaps there needs to be a PR campaign. I don't know who would do that, but it's not. getting rid of the police because we need the police. We need the popo. Like, we don't need them every incident, but we need the popo. Like, they're not going away. We won't have lawlessness, as I've seen some videos online. Like, that's not going to happen. And so thank you for explaining that to us out there. Do you think change is on the horizon, or it's just, another movement that will fade out?
Well, I think we're seeing something very different than what we saw 6 years ago with Eric Garner.
Yeah.
Chokeholds are banned finally in several cities. And it's like, when you heard that in 2020, we're like, didn't we do that already? Right?
Yeah.
But now the moments are coming where things are actually happening. And I heard a great quote the other day that this is not a moment in time of protest of people being angry. This is a movement. Yeah. This is really something that's more, it's a mission that you have elected officials who are finally on board. We have the most women and men of color that are in these particular local seats, that we need them to become lawmakers and actually get things done. We have progressive minds who actually are listening to the citizens to know what is it that we want. So what I see going forward is, my unfortunate take on this is that there will be another police involved shooting. There will be another death at the hands of a police officer. There will be another hashtag added to the list of the rallying cry that the Black Lives Matter movement has when they go out and they shout, "No justice, no peace." Because you don't change the mindset of a racist overnight. That's something that's taught from birth. And it's not going to be a complete overhaul or 180 change in the system for a long, long time. I don't think it's going to even happen in our generation, Brandon. We're not going to see a change until, God willing, our grandkids. I feel like right now, sadly, criminal justice is a buzzword. It's a trend topic that some journalists are all of a sudden interested in. It's not a reactive topic. It's something to be on top of all the time. That book, the criminal law book, the penal law books that are written for each jurisdiction, each state across this country, they need to be amended. It needs to be revamped. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, that this cannot be fixed overnight, and it cannot go away in a couple of months. I'm just prayerful that it will continue on and people don't lose steam, and just understand that justice has to continue to be called out and it has to be served. And us journalists, we have a large responsibility to make sure we're in those courtrooms and not having judges bar us out from those courtrooms. We have to fight, and we have to be there to let the public know what's going on behind those, jurisdictional doors that we are paying for. It's our money, and we need to know where it's going.
The road to justice is slow and steady. Thank you so much for clearing, giving us more information about what's happening, giving us some details about what we can expect. And hopefully it's some good stuff. Hopefully there's some justice for Breonna Taylor and all the Breonna Taylors out there who don't have, people, marching for them. I hope we can make some changes. Thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you.